In 1998, an entire American town fell silent. Not quiet silent. No wind, no crickets, not even the sound of their own voices. Within hours, 23 people were gone, without a trace. And to this day, no one can explain what happened. This is the story of the night the town went silent, and why locals still lock their doors at exactly the same time every year. There's something about small towns at night. The way the streetlights hum, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and the occasional bark of a distant dog. It's comforting until it isn't, because there's a night in the history of Coldwater, West Virginia, when all of that stopped, and the people who lived there still don't fully understand why. They just call it the night the town went silent. It was October 18th, 1998. The population of Coldwater was just under 2,000, most of them born and raised there. The town sat in a shallow valley along the Monongahela River, ringed by dense Appalachian forest. It wasn't the kind of place that made national headlines. Nothing of significance had ever happened there. At least, not until that night. The first sign of trouble came at exactly 9:17 p.m. People remember the time because the town's old courthouse clock chimed once, and then stopped. At first, no one thought much of it after all. The clock had been unreliable for years. But less than a minute later, every single dog in town began barking. It wasn't the normal kind of barking you hear in a neighborhood. Residents described it as panic, barking, a frantic, high-pitched sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. Then, the barking stopped completely, and that was when the silence began. It's hard to explain the kind of silence they were talking about. One resident, 74-year-old Mary Jo Carver, told reporters later that it felt like someone had put a glass dome over the town. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of cars on the state highway. The sound of your own breathing felt loud. Mary Jo remembered walking outside and realizing she could hear her heartbeat at 9:19 p.m. The power flickered. Streetlights dimmed to a sickly orange glow, then steadied again, but the silence didn't lift. Not even when a few residents tried shouting into the night. Their voices carried strangely, as though the air itself was swallowing the sound. Across town, in the Coldwater police station, Officer Dan Riker was sitting at his desk when the radio went dead. No static, no faint hum. Just off. He tapped the receiver, thinking the unit had lost power, but the station lights were still on. Then he picked up the phone dead line. He would later say the most unnerving part wasn't losing communications. It was realizing he could still see the lights of houses through his office window, but none of them looked right. They were too still. At 9:23 p.m., someone banged on the station's front door. It was Tom Callahan, a delivery driver for the local grocery store. Tom's hands were trembling. He said he'd just seen something out near Old Quarry Road. It wasn't a person, at least. Not exactly. He described it as tall, thin, moving like it wasn't walking so much as sliding. At first, Riker thought it was a bear on its hind legs, but Tom swore it had turned its head toward him, and there were no eyes, just two dark hollows that seemed to pull the light in. Riker grabbed his flashlight and sidearm, and the two men climbed into the cruiser. As they drove toward the quarry, the silence pressed harder. Even the sound of the cruiser's engine seemed muffled. And that's when Riker noticed something else. The air was thick, almost humid, like breathing through wet cloths. They reached the quarry road at 9:31 p.m. The headlights swept across the gravel. but the beam seemed to vanish barely, 20 feet ahead, as though swallowed by the dark. Then the radio in the cruiser briefly came back to life, just enough to spit out one word: run. The voice was flat, mechanical, and neither of them recognized it. Tom panicked. He told Riker to turn around, but before they could, they both saw movement, something impossibly tall at the edge of the tree line, half in shadow. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't fit. Riker would later refuse to describe the shape in detail, saying only, "It looked wrong in a way your brain can't fix." Back in the center of town, families were starting to realize something was very wrong. Some tried driving out of Coldwater, only to find every road blocked, not by police, but by abandoned vehicles. In each one, the driver's seat was empty, keys still in the ignition. Engines cold. At 9:44 p.m., the power went out completely. The silence deepened, if that was even possible. And then came the sound. It started low, so low, some people thought it was their own ears ringing. A droning hum, like a single sustained note from some massive instrument. It grew louder over the next few minutes, until it seemed to vibrate in people's bones. And in the dim moonlight, they saw shapes moving at the far ends of the streets, always at the edge of vision, slipping between shadows. One family, the Hanlons, decided to run for the old high school gym, thinking they'd be safer with other people. They made it 3 blocks before Mr. Hanlon was pulled into the dark between 2 buildings. His wife and daughter swore there was no sound, not even his scream, just the sudden absence of him. At 10:03 p.m., a light appeared in the sky over Coldwater. It wasn't a star, it was too close, too bright, and it moved with unnatural precision. Witnesses described it as a white sphere the size of a water tower, hovering silently above the courthouse. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it winked out. The hum stopped. The silence returned. Officer Riker and Tom didn't see the sphere. They were still near the quarry, but they both reported seeing a blinding flash behind them, like lightning without thunder. When they finally made it back to the station at 10:17 p.m., the phones were working again. But no one was on the other end. Just empty lines. By 10:30 p.m., it was over. The crickets were back. The wind picked up. Dogs barked again. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. But the damage was already done. 23 residents were missing. No trace of them was ever found. Not a drop of blood. The abandoned vehicles blocking the roads were gone by morning. The courthouse clock, the one that had chimed before all this started, was found shattered on the ground beneath the tower. No one admitted to taking it down. State police investigated, but their official report listed the incident as mass missing persons under unknown circumstances. Privately, some officers admitted they'd never seen anything like it. Strangest detail: every watch, wall clock, and digital timer in Coldwater had frozen at exactly 9:44 p.m., the moment the power went out. None of them could be reset. Today, Coldwater is still there. It's quieter than most towns, and the population never recovered from the loss. Most people don't talk about what happened. Outsiders say they're just being superstitious. But the locals know better. And every October 18th, at exactly 9:17 p.m., the streets empty. Lights go out, and the town waits, because no one's sure if the silence is coming back.